So thank you tonight. Tonight's session, breaking through these brick walls, I'm going to be going over two sets of surnames. I'm going to try to go over two sets of surnames and how I was able to figure out how these names are interrelated. And then I'm going to share with you guys tonight. And then after tonight, I'm going to post a comment about it in the Facebook groups. So a few years back, Emily and Emily did not come off. I'm gonna make sure she speaks after because I gave Emily a pass, but that's because Emily's my big cousin. If I'm Rodney's sister, Emily is my big cousin sister. We've been in this game 35 plus years. So we taught each other the internet, looking for Bullitt County matches. We got a chance to go down and meet together in Bullitt County. And so we've been in this a long time looking at records. And so while everyone got enthralled with DNA, I decided to look for records. And so I transcribed the entire county of Pike because Bullitt County was carved out of Pike County. Bullitt County was carved out of the 5 neighboring counties. And so one thing I knew, depending on where our relatives were living, that record for them and their enslavement could have been in a different county. So I just decided, I said, Emily, while you go to meetings and while you go to genealogy groups, I'm going to look at these records. And I looked at every deed, every probate, every will, and every estate record that had Pike attached to it, just looking for slaves. And so tonight I'm going to share with you this resource that I created, and I'll share it with you as a part of this presentation. So now I'm going to share. Okay. So you guys should be able to see my computer. Okay. So my computer, okay, there we go. So this is my tree. And if you can't see words, it's really about a visual. So when we're talking about third and fourth cousins, right, and fifth cousins, or what generation, generally the 1870 census hits us at about here, depending on the age of our ancestor. This column right here, when you're looking at your pedigree chart, in any pedigree chart, starting with yourself, you're one. When you go all the way over here, this is the 5th generation. So many times we're looking at a 5th cousin or a 4th cousin, one time removed, that's the 5th cousin. We're trying to figure out, where's our cousins falling in our pedigree chart, in our pedigree tree. So generally for me, I have filled, this is my maternal side out of the Bullock, Barber, Macon, Pike, Montgomery. So my maternal side is my Bullock County side. My grandmother, which is her here, Miss Violetta Van Hoos, I got the opportunity to torture her for many years. And I got a chance to take her to Alabama a few times, and I got to meet her nieces and her they weren't siblings at the time. Her siblings had passed, but I got a chance to meet some of her siblings. But her father actually had a few sets of children, but the older set of children was 30, but his last wife was 30 years younger than him. So that gave him a huge gap of children that I had to research. And so these are some of the things that people don't take into account when they're talking about low centimorgans and all of these different things. Some of our families are not a typical traditional, what they want to term as traditional. So sometimes we have to, not sometimes, we always have to think out of the box when we're looking at researching. So given that this is my grandmother, this is her father. If you see here hypothetically, this says he said he was born in Marengo, Alabama. And I'm like, how did you get from Marengo to Bullitt County? But okay. But then as I started looking at his father says he was born in Maryland, in DC. So my question was, how did you get to Bullitt County in this corner from Maryland? And so all of these are the things that we want to start paying attention to when we're looking for, now I'm looking for my 5th generation column's parents. And that's how come for me, I have been able to vet all of this. My mother is alive using records, and I'll show that tonight in some of my presentations. So I think I take for granted how I approach looking for our enslaved ancestors. And I think it's a process that I've just created for myself And I will share that tonight. So that's going to be a part of this presentation that I'm going to show right now. And so in breaking through these brick walls tonight, we're going to be looking at the Stratford and the Cook surname. Then we'll look at the Wannamaker Rogers surname. And there are other surnames that are become associated with that. And then I'm going to share the resource, which is the shanproject.com. So right here, tonight, my Mariah Stratford, which is here at the bottom. So I was able to figure out Mariah's maiden name, and she married Alexander Wood, her husband. And so given the fact that I found Mariah, I found Alexander, I found his parents, and so I've done a presentation on the surname, which is Agnes is actually a Houghton. The Houghton name connects to Wooten. The story there, and they are they are the enslavers, but their name was really Wooten, and then someone decided to change the name to Houghton. I believe one of the reasons why, and it could be more, but one of the Wootens decided to marry the slave and have children and have a family. And somewhere in there, at a minimum, that name changed to Houghton. And in Georgia, there is a Houghtonville. So I knew that my ancestors, my grandparents in this line here was Woods, Wooten, Hootens, and Hootens and Woods also connect to Leslie's. That's another name you'll want to pay attention to. So if you happen to have any relationships to Leslie's Woods Harper, she actually also married a George Harper closer to emancipation. So all three to four of these names are coming together under that one surname. And so this may prayerfully cause some clarification in why are we getting matches to these names. Well, when Mr. Alexander married Mariah, they had a daughter named Melissa, and Melissa married into the Fitzpatrick line. They had a daughter named Josephine, and they used to call her Josie Lloyd because she married a Robert Lloyd. Robert Lloyd had a son, I think that's Jack, and Jack is my mom's dad, Jackson Lloyd. And so Lloyd, Fitzpatrick, Wooten, Houghton, Leslie, Stratford, this makes up this one line. And so as I shared, the reason I ended up having to, I had written some books on some of my lines, but this line I had a blockage because my ancestors actually were mulatto. And now I need to figure out who's the family, why you're saying you're mulatto, or why is your name Stratford? So I needed to research that. And so before I wrote my book, I wanted to understand who were the enslavers. So Mariah believed she was born in 1842 in Georgia or Virginia. I think depending on what record, sometimes we will see that interchangeably. 1870 might say Georgia, 1900, 1910 might say Virginia. But we have to lean on what they're sharing with us to guide us. Orally, that's all we can go by. There was no DNA. We use DNA to solidify, to validate and verify. But I mean, that's a recent thing that we're just now trying to start utilizing. I strongly feel and know because of our African American heritage, oral history was all we had. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. So the most that they could do was orally pass down that story. I've seen many names that was misspelled or a different name. Wood sometimes is mistaken for hood. It's crazy, just trying to figure all this out. So this shows in 1870, because I knew my mom, I knew her dad, I started tracking the Fitzpatricks. After having tracked the Fitzpatricks, I was able to figure out that Mariah, who was a Wood, she was mulatto, stated she was born in Georgia. But as you see on the right, she was living in the house of white people in 1870. Her husband was 30, she was 28, and they both were mulattoes. So one of the things that halted me also with Alec, why are you mulatto? Who is your father? And why is your name Wood compared to what your mom's name is? And so all of these are the things we have to step strategically into trying to prove or disprove what is stated. I'm pretty sure these were some very fair-skinned people to say that they were mulatto. Possibly, we don't know, but it is recorded they was mulatto, so I had to respect that. This is the marriage record. So now I'm trying to figure out, okay, Mariah, who are you? I finally figured out Alex in the Fitzpatrick line. Alex was one name I had to figure out, and then Mariah. So as I looked at Mariah's marriage record, as you see here, her name was spelled Stratford, and she married Alexander Wood. Given the fact the census said they were mulatto, I knew that I was looking in that regard for those names. And this is just showing what I had shared earlier about her connection to the Houghton, Wood, Harper, all of those surnames. And so as I'm stepping back into enslavement period, now I have to try to track who were the enslavers, because as you see their ages, they were all born in slavery. Mm-hmm. So this here is another visual form of the marriage record. That was that one record. I don't know why. Maybe someone can tell me, but I have seen where they wrote Freeman. And I do believe in Alabama there was a colored book and then there was a white book. And maybe they wrote Freeman because that was their way of saying black instead of whatever they were trying to say. And as you can see, they were married in 1868. So I knew I was stuck with the name Stratford. Okay. So then after I can figure out who I'm dealing with, I said, okay, let me look at the 1870 census, who's living in the area with this name. Mm-hmm. And so now in 1870, we have Macon County, the Cross Keys area, and then at the bottom, we have Montgomery. Mm-hmm. So for the region and the area we're talking about, Macon and Montgomery were the two areas I was dealing with. Given the fact that Bullock was carved out of Montgomery and Macon, so this is telling me that this is most likely that corner of Montgomery that's right butting up against Macon and Bullock County, mm-hmm. very close to that southern end of Montgomery, not the middle, not the upper. So it's keeping an alignment, right? And so the Montgomery Ward 5. So now I know, or the township range 16, this is most likely that area that's closer to the Bullock County area. One thing that I have been able to determine many times, it has been written in books for Bullock County. So that we know, many of us know, and if you didn't know, it wasn't created until emancipation. And as it was written, so as you visited Bullock County now, stores, the railroad was close by in on the Fitzpatrick area. Then we have the railroad cutting in the Fort Davis area. But once emancipation came, those enslavers were living closer to Indian Creek, Pike County Inn, and they kind of didn't want to have to come up to Bullock County, Union Springs to shop. So they created their own little hub corners in the Indian Spring areas because the slaves predominantly were in this area. So whereas the suburbs for them were the outer areas and the slaves were more in the inner areas. And so this is one reason why I do believe that Macon and Montgomery ended up being the areas where these Stratfords were living compared to being in Union Springs or Bullock County. So in 1880, Mariah and her husband, Alex, this is just a census summary that's saying, so now she's moved from Bullock County to Montgomery. Mm-hmm. Still stated mulatto. And now we see these names that are coming out. Alex, and his mother was Agnes Harper. But his brother was Henry Lasty. It took me until this year to realize that actually is a Leslie. And that's because in my Bullock County group here, Facebook group, I actually have a couple of Leslies. And once I finally realized that was a typo, I was able to connect to them. I'm DNA related to them, and they are white families. So now, and actually speaking with Evelyn is her name, and her husband as well, I think he was the Leslie. They are part Indian. So I can't wait to have that conversation with her about that part, because it'd be very interesting to understand. We know that the areas was of Indian descent,
Mhm.
but we know that some people stay behind. Our ancestors have told us that. We
Mhm.
know that we do have, many of us do have, even if in small centimorgans, some Indian descent. But I want to better understand who was remaining. My grandmother and my oldest aunt knew my grandmother's grandfather, and he was half Indian, and his last name was Cope. And so we're needing to take those oral stories and prove them. DNA is helping us to do that. Aligning ourselves with the right cousins, right? That's why it's important to be able to do that. So in 1880, Alex and Mariah, this is the census version of that summary, where she's basically stating that she was born in Alabama, but she don't know where her parents were born.
Mhm.
And that's just because of her age. So, we know we have to use the census to try to figure these things out. And again, Alex and Mariah are mulatto, but Agnes is black. And Alex took the name Wood. His mother took the name Harper. Henry is a nephew. So that means he had a sister who was the sister, but why is your name Leslie? So all of these were things that I had to try to take into account to figure out that story. But this is about Mariah, not Alex, and that story. That's another video on my YouTube channel.
Mhm.
So on the 1860 census, now we want to step back and figure out who's the players, who's the enslavers that we're dealing with. So now that I'm able to see who are the names I need to be paying attention to, this is everyone in 1860. So we know in Alabama, there aren't many African Americans who are identified as being free persons of color. There were some. Um, I definitely have never seen any that I'm related to, but there were some. But for the Stratford name, again, they were in Macon, they were in Montgomery. And we want to pay attention to where they're born and their ages, because that's going to help us to drive. So you are migrating from where?
Mhm.
So, District of Columbia, if we look at the 1860s, South Carolina, that person was born in 1827. And the other areas are District of or Connecticut. So for me, who is on the 1860 free census, I won't say doesn't matter. I want to know who is the family, but I need to know who owned slaves.
Mhm.
That's what's going to matter to me. So as I look at who owned slaves, only name that showed up in Macon County was this Richard Stratford. So as I looked at Mr. Richard Stratford, we see that he's in the Southern Division of Macon. He actually had two records. So on the first record for him, he had 12 slaves. On the second record for him, he had 8. What's very important to pay attention to when we're looking at the slave census is it's not enough to see the ages. It's not enough to see the number. You really want to drill in and look at that record. So for Richard Stratford, what we're looking for is, now mind you, my Mariah says she was mulatto. So I'm going to be looking for, after the number of slaves, the ages of those slaves, the sex of those slaves. The quotation marks basically meant black. So there is no broken up where it says mulatto. And they wouldn't most likely have all of them as mulatto. So these are all successional slaves who were black. Two 20-year-old females, two 12-year-old males. So this is his count that would take him to, I believe it said 20. But that right corner indication on his name says how many slave houses he owned for this set of slaves. What's very important about that is it's going to help us to understand this was most likely two families. And most likely the family that had the 12-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 7-6, no, there's 3 5-year-olds. So that's not true. There's two 2-year-olds. So no, I can't even say if this was 111, I could say this was one family. So there's two separate households. So most likely this may have been two families. So it just helps us to pay attention to when we're looking at 1870, because now the 1870 is going to be that census that we can line up in age 10 years after 60. How do
Mhm.
they line up with what we're seeing based on the slave census to try to give us an account of, can we match 1870 to this record? And then the second record that he had was for three houses. So for this one, he actually had three slave houses. And there was a 60-year-old. And there are no mulattoes, at least identified in 1860 here. And there were a lot of one slave. There were two 16-year-old males. So now we're looking at about five houses, right? In 1860. So as we look at the 1870, can we try to group those houses to be able to get a better understanding of who may have been the slaves that were assigned to these homes? And so that's one way of being able to line up your 1870 census to your first enslaved census. This is the 1850 census. And what I was looking for, okay, now in 1850, who is there? And now we only see Mr. Richard Stratford once. But then we start seeing, when I did a search for Alabama Stratfords, I am pulling back to South Carolina Stratfords. And in 1850, Mr. Richard had one mulatto male who was 16 at the time. So we ask ourselves, where did he go in 1870 that he's not recorded? Of course, some of the theories could be he could have been hired out. He could have went somewhere else to live, to work. So these are some of the things that may have occurred. He could have died because he's not recorded in 1860. But this is how I try to line up those progressing from 1870 through the slave census. And so I don't believe, I think after 1840, they may not have been there, or if it was still Richard. I'm trying to determine, when did you come to Alabama? Where did you come from? So now that I figured out when you guys were no longer in Alabama, now I have a threshold to say, okay, I'm building off of right now this was 1850, so I'll start at 1850. Prior to that, you were most likely in South Carolina because that's where you were born. I'm going to build Richard's tree. And I'm going to take Richard's tree all the way back to the oldest family member he has, up until the time they migrated from their native land, country, to America. I just build, and I just build, and I just build, and I just pray I'm adding the right people with the right names based on the right trees. Because I don't know, but I know that I need to build this man's story to figure out, how do I find my ancestor? And so I have to clear my head, and I take the time, if it takes a day, if it takes 2 days. Now I'm going to build this Stratford tree. And so what you see here is I started with, Mr. Stratford. I'm building him from 18, I'm just starting with his name based on what I see with Alabama. And so now I have Mr. Anderson Stratford Jr., died in Cross Keys, Macon in 1870. But he was born in South Carolina. So now I'm going to look for trees that have Richard Anderson Stratford, South Carolina, Macon County. If that person's tree lines up with what I need, I'm going to just start adding people's names. But this is a research tree because I need to make sure it makes sense, right? So after I add my people, and if I can find the census, even better. Because it's important to make sure you can gather as many census records as you can based on their age. Because what the census helps to solidify is, at what point did you have census? Maybe you didn't have any census. Then all of a sudden you started collecting slaves. Sorry, I meant slaves. You started getting slaves in 1820. So in 1820, hypothetically, Mr. Richard was 26 years old. That would make sense. You probably may have slaves. If he had no slaves, then what that says to me is you're working off your father's land. The slaves are most likely your dad's. So this is something that you want to be paying attention to, tracking, to build that story, to understand what was their practices when it came to slaves. One of the things I should have added, I apologize, but I'm going to add it right now, right here. you also want to make sure you add the parents of the spouse, whether it's a male spouse or whether it's a female spouse. You add the parents of that spouse because Barbara may have gotten slaves from her family that she brought into this marriage. And so now not all of Mr. Stratford's slaves came from his father or his line. She may have brought slaves in. So when we start paying attention to, I have Coleman's, I don't know why. Why do I have Coleman matches in South Carolina? Because maybe someone who was brought into this marriage, who was a slave, connected to someone that came with the Stratford line, and now you are the descendant of that line, but they were separated from their Coleman family. So I always add parents to the spouse, and I add the records, and I'm specifically looking for probates because Barbara died in 1814, and she actually died around the same time that Richard died. So what becomes very key and pivotal to that, if Barbara outlived Richard, then he writes his will to make sure that she gets support. If she dies, he writes his will to say, if she dies, then what will happen to those slaves after that? And that's that thing you have to start tracking. So this right here shows Richard when he died in 1814. Ancestry, they do a decent job. I'm not going to say that they're 100% correct in the spelling of the identifiable names when you're looking at the summary of the probate record. This is me showing you what that summary looked like, but immediately I see he had slaves. And Ancestry is trying to share with us the allocation of the slaves based on the child that was given. So I take it upon myself to rewrite that so that it makes sense for me. So I'll show this to you live on the profile itself. But one thing I saw, because I'm tracking Richard, who went to Alabama. So down here, this Richard, who was a son, he was allocated one slave by his father named Ned, who was a man. I don't know what Ned means to me today. I know that I'm tracking Richard right now. I know that Ned is interesting. I can't say that Ned is an ancestor to me, but I'm tracking all of the allocation of the slaves. So now Richard. So now we want to look at Richard's father. The Richard from Alabama, his father. And the Richard from Alabama father was George. So George died in South Carolina. And this looks a little crazy, but what this is basically saying is George's wife was a Sarah Jane Stewart Stratford. So Stewart is a name that I would be searching for. Let me see if I have any Stewarts in South Carolina, particularly Lancaster, because Kershaw or Lancaster, but he died in Lancaster, so that was probably the last place where they were. So I would go looking for Stewarts in South Carolina. Then I would narrow that search down to Lancaster to see does anything return. Because if it does, now that helps to give you a direction of where to look for where that connection is coming from. So down here we see that George had a daughter named Sarah. Sarah, and what I do, this is, you'll see the visuals of what I do, but after the last name, in that little field where I think you would normally type the fourth, the third, that kind of thing, I use it to track born and death location because I want to visually understand where these people were born and died because Alabama is important to me. So which of these children went to Alabama is what I'm looking for because that's the person that I want to focus my research on. Not that any of the others don't matter, but I want to hone in my research for the Alabama connections. So now that I see that George had a daughter, Sarah, who went to Alabama, she died in 1870, but she married someone with the last name of Cook. In George's will on the right-hand side, you will see that Sarah was given all of these slaves. Each of the children did receive slaves, but Sarah was giving Maria. and that was in 1856, which means Mariah, where she changed her name to Mariah, was about, 14 years old. She was a teenager, a child. So now I'm like, I think I found my Maria. This is lining up. This is completely making sense. So now when I look in Alabama for the Cook names, I did see matches. Am I seeing matches to the name Cook? So again, this is a visual that's showing you Sarah received my Mariah. She married Benjamin Cook. She died in Alabama, in Montgomery. They were living in about Montgomery. But was I able to see any names of Cook? Under the Cook name, they had a son, Benjamin, who died in 1863. Benjamin went to Mississippi. So out of all of the Cook children, one went to Mississippi. The rest died. One, I believe, and I'll show you that visually. One died in Choctaw. Some died in Montgomery. One died in Mississippi. So when we're trying to understand where these connections coming from, without doing the work to track the enslaver's family, to look at all of the probate records and to see where the names of the slaves are coming from, we don't understand how the family got separated and was removed to a whole nother location. And so this is going to help us to understand how to find those connections. The right-hand side just shows us Richard. So Sarah and Richard, her uncle, went to Alabama. And Richard is the one who had slaves. But the reason why we didn't see Sarah and I didn't see my Maria or Mariah was because she was now under Sarah, who was now a cook. So that's the end of my Stratford Cook explanation. So was that clear for you? At least as far as how I was able to find my connection, connecting it back to South Carolina. And because Sarah was mulatto, and right now, until I find my other DNA matches, I have no choice but to say George is the father. Prayerfully, I'll find more cousins that can help me to solidify that connection to George and that family. So, okay, it's clear, no questions. I do try to be thorough, cousins. So I want to do an exercise, if you will. Those of you who can and will, if you can do a search for the name Cook, search your DNA matches for Cooks in Alabama. Now I'll share and do a search myself. If you have more than one family member, like a sibling, a cousin, an aunt, and you're managing their DNA, don't just check yours, check theirs as well. My brother definitely pulls different matches than me many times. So I'm going to search for Cook in, I said Alabama. So Jabri is related to me. So the name I'm looking at is my mom's dad. Jabri is on my grandmother's side, Anderson side. Copes, Rhodes, Jabri is on that side. So basically, I would have to look at her tree to see where does she have cooks, because I didn't know she had cooks. So this is kind of cool, right? This F minor, I've seen his name a couple of times. He is on my maternal side. I do have some paternal matches and some maternal matches, but most of these are my maternal matches. So I'm going to take a look at Mr. Minor and see where his cook is in his tree. I think I saw a cook real. I did. Look right there. Yes. Right there. They were removed to Choctaw.
Deborah,
Yes.
I did put cooks in my tree in Alabama,
Yes.
and I think I had some. It came up with 27 matches.
Because the exercise were, do you have cooks in Alabama? And so the first step I take is, let me see if I have any cooks, any name that I'm looking for. Now let me look in their tree. I said to you that some of Sarah's children went to Choctaw. So what this says to me is, like my Mariah, instead she chose Stratford. That name that chose Cook. Are you related to me through this name Cook because you got separated and went to Choctaw? And you were born in 1845, 1870, you were still 25. So maybe you chose to take that name. I don't know where the minor part comes from. He said he kept Cook and he became a minor. All of these are, and someone's missing. A paternal line is missing. So these are the things that says to me, you are my cousin because you are a DNA to me. Let's talk about about cooks and minors. And the next step that I would take is I would say to him, let's get you in GEDmatch. What's your GEDmatch ID? For starters, to see what GEDmatch says is our closest ancestor. What I'm going to show you is how I have multiple cousins crossing different lines because our family members married into a different line that we have. And so that's what GEDmatch helps in GEDmatch and DNA Painter. I more love DNA Painter for what it's calling out to me, but because I am now looking at some of my other ancestors, my DNA matchups with DNA Painter are making sense now. Because some of you may have been in my session. I was like, you're not supposed to be there. You're only supposed to be on one line. You might have heard me say that, and I didn't understand, why are you on this other line? But that's because their descendants or their line is marrying into my other line. These systems are not going to tell us this. They're not going to break down and say, oh, well, you have multiple matches on one paternal side, and you have matches on both sides. Your one match is on both sides. They're not designed and developed to do that. So they're only giving us the one lane that they can calculate. And sometimes as we look at the records and as we look at this in deeper, we can see that it's not enough. But we have to take what they're giving us. So this cook was out of Virginia. So that right now, to me, at the moment, I would have to have a whole conversation because I'm not understanding what I see with this cook, right? But that's what you do. What you're doing is you're just poking because you're my cousin. So do you have Georgia? Do you have a name somewhere that's making us kin? Maybe it's not Cook with this person. So it just helps to structure the conversation we're having with some of our matches and trying to break through those matches. So I think that was the only thing that was running into the Stratford line that I saw. Let me look at my tree real fast. So for Richard, so this is how I track the slaves and the census, and it may be small, it may seem crazy, but I need a visual to help me to understand what makes sense. So Richard here was one of the oldest. He was born in England and he died in South Carolina. So even though I added other ancestors, for me, this is enough. This is all I need. I just want to know when you came here from America. Now I'm going to start building your records. I want to know, in 1790, did you have slaves? So in 1790, Mr. Richard had no slaves. And now he's in the Chehalis district of South Carolina, the St. Thomas Chehalis district. Remember, we must pay attention to what the map looked like at that time, not today. Because I promise you, I've looked at South Carolina maps. Very different based on the earlier time periods than now. Charleston was this big, and then now it became this small, depending on when they finally carved other counties out of it. So that's why you can't pay attention to Charleston. You have to know, what date am I looking at to see what the map looked like. 1800, Mr. Stratford had no slaves. So they might have been Quakers, I think, or maybe she just didn't have no fluidness because here he doesn't have any slaves. Oh, he had 13. So sorry. In 1810, he finally had 13 slaves. and then the man died a year later. So now, other than his will, where did you get these slaves from? So I'm now, if I want to dig deeper, which I will, because I want to understand who's Mariah's mother, if I'm saying that her father happened to be George. But so on the right hand side in the notes field, I track, did you have slaves? That little text box that came up, I copy from the name, I hit Control C, and I throw it over here on the side, just so that I can see what I'm paying attention to. That's just me, but I want to make sure I'm tracking the story of this person. Then I'm trying to make sure I understand who were the actual names that were identified in the will. And then down here, I'm allocating Ruth Nelson, got Old Kate and Charlotte. Is Old Kate one of my ancestors? So now if I go search for South Carolina, the name Nelson, will I see matches? Because Mr. George's father had an older woman who was named Kate, and she got separated by a daughter who married a Nelson. So let's take a look and see if I can find.
And you're trying to find her mother.
Her mother, yes, because I believe with her being mulatto, she could have had a mulatto dad, so there's another thing that I needed to remind myself that Elizabeth.
Because I'm wondering when I first heard the word mulatto, of course I thought black and white. But then if it wound up in my mind as saying, wait a minute, mulatto actually means mixed breed. So I'm wondering if Maria, whatever her name was, might have some Indian in her, because that could also make her mulatto.
Absolutely. But so right now, my holding place, because this is
So maybe her mother was Indian.
well, right now, my holding place is George. That's my holding place because I still have to look for more DNA matches. The DNA matches are what's going to help me to solidify more of this story.
Okay.
Also, looking at the separation of the slaves. So I track all of the daughters, who they married, as best I can. Because right now, right, I'm showing you, I have some Nelsons in South Carolina.
Okay.
So the reason why I started looking at Nelson is because what I was looking at with the tree for Mr. Richard, his daughter married a Nelson. So which daughter married a Nelson? Because this daughter right here, Ruth, received Old Kate. This daughter right here. So Ruth received Old Kate. And so I go in here and I put all that good stuff. And then what I would have normally done is add the tree for the daughter, figure it out if the husband had slaves, and figure it out because again, I do put and I copy that small subset of the slaves to that child. And now when I track her, I want to be able to see, is there any names that I'm going to pull out of this person that's going to line me up with this one cousin that I have lost, but this one cousin right here who has in his tree the name Nelson. So in his tree, he has Nelsons, right? And he has Preston, who was born in 1838. And then Converse, who was born in 1863. So as I build the tree for that daughter, I am looking to see, does these names come out? And that's when I'm able to say, now I have figured out how I'm related to Nelsons in South Carolina. This is that connection. But I have to build this tree. And so this is a good example because I know Rodney has been asking me, Delbert, how do you build the trees? How do you expand it? So I'll go through that step a little. I'll go through that step some. So this person has so all I did here, look at the hints. What is Ancestry giving me? So when it comes to the enslavers, I accept the hints because I don't know these families, right? But I want to look and see, I would love to see a will. Love to see a will. She died 1857. So there would have been a will. So Ancestry is giving me a will. So I start with looking at, so her husband was Mr. John Alexander Nelson. So I'll review it. Looks good to me. I try to make sure I see. So like here, there was 2 James, 2 Marys. This is a terrible tree. So I try to make sure that I don't add all these extra names into this tree that I'm building for her. Because this is a working tree, right? So I don't want to have duplicate names in my tree. So John, I get rid of that. So they are 1790. We're back in the kissing 1800s.
Oh boy. Okay.
Because we got to remember, so my Mariah was tied to George, who was early 1800s, late 1700s. So in order for me, and where I found her was the gentleman that was born in the 1790s. He had a son. That son had my ancestor. I can't say that I would have found him as easily, but I want to make sure that I understand the history of my enslaved ancestors. So I take it as far back as when they came from America, and I build out their tree. So what I'm showing you how now is not necessarily how I would find Mariah. I found Mariah. I'm trying to find Mariah's parents, grandparents,
And
cousins.
you said Nelson's in South Carolina, right?
Nelson's in South Carolina, yes. I know I'm going, okay, there's a duplicate I can avoid. So Mary took the name Gaskin, very cool. And so do I have Gaskins in South Carolina? Because now her sister or her daughter died in South Carolina. So this is how we track those other names that we're matching, and we don't know where the South Carolina connection is coming from. So this is the second South Carolina ancestor I'm building. And, Emma and I both is like, what are we doing in South Carolina? Why are we in Williamsburg? Why are we in Edgefield? What are we doing over here? We're in Alabama. You won't know until you build out that story. And I'm avoiding the stuff at the bottom because I already have all this information in my tree. The only time I will add it,
Cousin,
it's a guessing game.
I just did a search for South Carolina,
Else's
1790, and I found, let me get it straight here. No, I found a Samuel Nelson in Edgefield, South Carolina. So I'm viewing his record as we speak.
Edgefield is definitely, I know for a fact I have Edgefields. Emily has Edgefields. We're trying to figure out what and why and where. And so this is why it's important to build out these trees that we're working on so that we can try to determine where these matches are coming from. Yes, it takes some work. One of the things I was noticing was one of her brothers actually ended up in Alabama. As I was adding that person to my tree, I'm paying attention to where they're born and where they died. Somebody is in Alabama. And I can't recall it. Russell. I think I saw Russell, Alabama. So now this has opened up a new surname that connects to Stratford's, which is Nelson. So this is Indiana. This is Indiana. And so what I do is I say he was born in South Carolina, but died in, the heck is Indiana? Indiana. And so that lets me know that was a death in Indiana to pay attention to, right? In case I have any cousins that want to talk to me about the connections they have and that kind of thing. So these are just some of the tips that I use to help me to make sense of the madness. Because this is a lot of work and this is maddening. Here's a Tennessee. So here's a Nelson who went to Tennessee. And so now I would say, let me see if I got Nelson matches in Tennessee. And so now this is how I triangulate those relationships to see if they make sense. I use myself, I'll use my brother, and sometimes, like for instance, Jerome is on the call tonight. If he says, I have Nelson's in Indiana, you do, I'll have him check to see who he's matching. I'll have him check his jet match, because this is how we triangulate ourselves against our connections to see if they're going to match. Why? DNA distributes randomly. And because it distributes randomly, it's helpful to be able to use yourself against your cousins and being able to see if we triangulate our matches. I don't know where. So that match I was looking for, this is a Georgia. So her brother came to Georgia. Ruth's son came to Georgia. And maybe it was a sibling that went to Alabama that I haven't finished tracking. But so now after I've added all of those kids, and I might have too many kids, it's just a chance that we take. I do add the SARs and the DARs are absolutely great, because these people are saying who they've gotten. There's an application or an approval. If they've gotten into the SAR or the DAR, I'm going to look at their record to help me to figure out who they have said are actual family members, instead of taking the word of people out here like I just copied. But because I don't need everybody. So I just start adding. The family histories are great to read, because a lot of times when they're in South Carolina, they're going to talk about their Alabama connections. The Alabama stories are going to talk about their other family lines somewhere else. So it's really great to be able to add that information. I don't care about when they were born. You said England. I accept it. That's good for me. But I will take a look at the will. So this is a will, and this is the index of the will. So basically, this is saying that Jane died, and her records are on page 307 to 309. And I don't know if that is going to be here. So 307, yeah, help me remember that number, 307. Rodney hates cursive, and I've told Rodney, well, then you need to get out the game, or you need to take your time, one letter at a time, to figure out what it's saying, because this is the only way we're going to find our ancestors, is we got to read.
When it comes to the cursive writing, back in those days, the way that they did their cursive writing is different than what we do now. So I tried. Lord knows I tried to read and to make out what I was seeing. I even enlarged it, and I am having a problem. It's not my eyesight, folks. It's the style of writing back in the 1800s, which was goofy but acceptable. So what I'm trying to do is this. I'm trying to find somebody who can help me understand that kind of cursive writing, because the way that we write cursive is different than the way that they write cursive. And I spent about 4.5 hours just looking at it, just trying to mentally prepare my mind. And it was like me trying to understand mangling Chinese characters. I could have looked at that thing all night and nothing was clicking. See, Cousin Deborah,
Yes.
I love you. And you are amazing, not only as a researcher, but as a cousin. However, however, when it comes to your knowledge versus mine,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you're trying to go for your master's, and I'm still in the 5th grade. Okay. So when I ask my fellow cousins,
Mm-hmm.
all of y'all, I love all of y'all, when I ask for help in this venture, I'm not saying do the work for me. No, no, no. But what I want is clarification from my cousins so that I will know certain things that I'm reading and what they really where they really factor in. Now, Cousin Deborah,
Yes.
does that make it simple to you?
I understand. What happens with this process, like all processes in genealogy that we're coming to learn, there is, in everything, there's a learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that there is a learning curve. The only way to get beyond that learning curve is to practice it. And that's what I have said. So, for instance, in this will that I pulled up, sorry, um, what I look for, I'm going to minimize this because what I look for, I don't want to sit up here and read their whole thesis, but generally the makeup of a will have the following. And I don't want to spend a lot of time because I still need to get to the Rogers surname, then I still need to get to the resource. But I am trying to share with you guys how I dive into finding the slaves, which I think is important, and the research that I take to get me there. But when it comes to the will, the first thing is going to say they're going to give credit to God and thank Him, and they know that their health is bad. Let me get past that. You're going to talk about I am dead and buried in a Christian-like manner. I'm going to get past that because see, we see Christian, manner, personal, and real estate. I'm past that. Then they start numbering and allocating what they want given. So normally, if I can go down to the first, the second, the third, they're always try to break it apart, especially when they're allocating things to a lot of kids or whatever, if they have a lot of property. So she bequeathed to her daughter, Amanda, Nelson, and all of these other people. I'm looking for that cursive that I'm looking for that says slaves. That's all I'm looking for. So I don't read, I scan, right? I'm looking for the scan. So get comfortable with looking for the scan of the word slaves right there. Small s, big S, slave, or Negro, or servant. But you are looking for the things that stand. Negro is right there. 2 Negro slaves, which I put in this underline here. The 2 Negro slaves, Davis and Charles. Because if they don't have slaves, I move on. That's all I care about, right? So now that Family Search, I'm hearing that Family Search is doing a lot better with, that's what you need. That's what you need. Hallelujah, Jesus, God, thank you. That's what you need. I'm going to do my best. If I don't do nothing but before I get off this call tonight, I'm going to do that for you, Rodney. I'm going to show you how to use Family Search, or whatever they call that, advanced text search. I wasn't believing Family Search because it's one thing to give us wills, it's another thing to give us probate. I want deeds because I need it all. And so I think I watched a video tonight that said they have included deeds. Maybe it's for certain areas, but let's get the bang of what we can get. Because I've transcribed an entire county, I'm looking for them to have transcribed everything. So I do not rely solely on the Family Search full text search, but it's a great helper. And it will be a great helper to you, Rodney. I'll show you that. So, guys, at the end of the day, this is just showing you that, yes, she had slaves. She allocated in number 2, she started identifying slaves. Then down here, whatever it's talking about Amanda, she doesn't have a whole lot, but she at least had a couple of slaves. So for me, I start adding those slaves to the notes section for Ruth. Over here, I'll say Davis and whatever they had and whoever she gave them to. So over here is where I start making all my little notes that I want to have about her. And then as I start trying to connect to the cousins I match, that's where I'm looking to build that. So that was just a conversation about that. So prayerfully, you guys understand where I'm coming from with the Stratfords coming out of South Carolina and moved to Alabama. And now we're looking for Stratfords and Cooks, Montgomery, and Macon County, Alabama. My Mariah married a Lloyd. So being able to look and see if you happen to have any connections, maybe they married before 1870 and that name changed. And that's what happened for me. Okay. So the next name that I will share, and I don't have a pretty PowerPoint, so I'm going to have to painstakingly show this as a visual, is Wannamaker. But oh my gosh, that was another game changer for me, being able to find my Wannamaker connection. So if you look at so I'm going to stop sharing because I want to be able to show, if you look at the picture behind me, you'll see a gentleman at the top and a woman sitting at the bottom. And then my grandmother is at the bottom. And so I was searching for the name Earl in South Carolina. And searching in the name Earl, I tripped over a DNA cousin, and in their tray, they had this woman at the top here. Her name was Lucretia Wannamaker. And I said, I don't know who you are, lady, but you absolutely, unequivocally look like my grandmother. You are my grandmother's descendant. I'm going to stick you in this tree and you're going to float till I figure this out. And I knew that this was my grandmother's ancestor, hands down. Oh my gosh. I was astounded. I threw that on my Facebook page. I think you guys might have saw that. I threw it on my doggone, I threw it everywhere because for the love that I have of my grandmother is why I'm doing this. For the love of that lady, to find someone that matched her, I think I was about to fall out of my chair. So this is Lucretia down here. And they had these two photos actually of my grandmother. Oh, I'm sorry, of my ancestor. This is a picture of her and her daughters right there. If you knew my grandmother, her neck, it almost seemed like it was a male's neck. She had a strong neck that I think they said she had a cut and a goiter or something like that, my grandmother. When her hair was white, how she just stood like a tall statue to me, and her hands. So this is a photo of Lucretia and her two daughters that I found that someone had in their tree. And then the next photo was her sitting with her husband. He is an Earl. She is a Wannamaker. And on the Earl side, Earl descend out of England. And I have England connections on maternal and paternal. So England connection was important to me, and that Earl name is important to me. And I know that it's pulling on both sides. But as you look at that lady's hands there in her lap, and you look at my grandmother's hands, and you look at my grandmother's neck, oh my God, I was so in love. Someone actually had these photos. I'm going to say tonight, don't get mad if somebody purposely takes your photo, permanently borrows your photo. It's out of love because, oh my God, it's such a fine. Now, if they maliciously are just adding photos to add photos, let's talk because that was a beautiful find for me. But nonetheless, so I found this Lucretia Wannamaker, and I absolutely didn't understand where this lady was coming from for me. And I had to research and figure out who is she and what is Wannamaker as it pertains to Alabama, the Alabama story. So this whole Lucretia Wannamaker corner is a little confusing because I still don't work. I know how she blend in. Okay, I know where I gotta go. So this is about a conversation for, oh, there it is. Mr. Wannamaker, 1827. Okay. So this is the story, y'all, about Rogers. This is a conversation about the Rogers name in Bullitt County, may extend further out. But Mr. George Wannamaker lived in South Carolina. And these were his children. So again, I did not build this story whatsoever. I tripped over a record that explained to me the Wannamaker connection. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go there. This is a website, especially, I'll put it in the chat, but you guys are going to want to keep if you're researching Alabama. This particular website is basically Alabama Genealogy Society. So the Alabama Genealogy Society, everything Alabama, everything genealogy, you can join to become a member of them. So I did become a member. They send out, I believe, a quarterly newsletter, but they do have this website. They do have a program that they call the First Families of Alabama, which is cool, and I'm going to be submitting my information soon. And basically what this is, if you identify your ancestor that was enslaved, but born in Alabama. So this is not just living, this is born in Alabama. If you identify they were born in Alabama, then you can submit them, and then they will identify them as the first families in Alabama because they contributed to Alabama. So this is just something that I am going to be doing fairly soon. but I wanted to finish vetting my ancestors, right? But then they have on the left-hand side what they call the Loose Record Project. This Loose Record Project basically is they've gotten volunteers who will go in and look at, these are not probates, these are not deeds, these are just records that are loose. I don't know how, because some of them are probate records and some of them are deeds, but they're called loose county records. And so to look at Bullitt County, what they're doing is they're going in and having transcribers. So I think I've signed up for 2 counties, Bullock and Pike. And I will probably be signing up soon to begin that process. So what they're doing is if you find a slave name, identify the slave, and then I guess the page that that slave is recorded on. What they are not doing is they will not drill into a record and go page by page. And at the end of the day, this is what they're choosing to do. And so I can't do anything but to respect it. So this is basically the slave name that someone has recorded. If they, on the cover page, you see slaves, they're asking people to identify the name of the slave in this spreadsheet and have the link to the cover page. So I believe that's what they're doing. So all the slaves are listed separately. However, but the rest of these are just the individuals that are identified on the records. I'm telling you, it was nothing but God how I found this record, because I struggled finding it again.
Here they are.
Okay, these are all the Rogers, but it's 1870. The record is like 1872. It's definitely not 1900. I know it's not Wannamaker because she was a Rogers by then. Ooh, praise the Lord. Okay. I'm praying that this is this. I think this is the record. Rotate to the right. This is the record. See how it's Rogers, comma, George. Oh my gosh. Oh, that was just a devil trying to tax my nerve. Okay. So this particular record. So one day I went to Bullitt County. So again, I apologize for the delay, but the story is Bullitt County wasn't created until 1865. So past 1867, I look for nothing that tells me about slaves in Bullitt County. So when they had this loose leaf record project, the spirit told me, go on here, and I literally just clicked this link, didn't understand why. I wasn't looking for the name Rogers. I was looking for the name Wannamaker, but I wasn't at that time. I clicked on this link. This is what you see. George A. Rogers died in 1869, but actually he died about 1862. So that's why there's always these give and takes, and you have to look at the records. His wife was Mary A. Rogers. They had a daughter named Mary L. Dubose, whose husband was James Dubose. They had a son, George D. Rogers, Eugenie T. Rogers, Urban R. Rogers. William C. Wannamaker was the first husband of Mary A. Rogers, deceased. Mary Ann Wannamaker was the daughter of Mary A. Rogers and William C. Wannamaker. And these were the slaves of the Wannamaker, of the Rogers. This was the very first time I ever saw the name Wannamaker.
Mhm.
And I said, wait a minute. This is my Wannamaker in Bullitt County, in Pike County, Alabama, actually, when the record was transcribed. Are you kidding me? And so so basically this is the story. Mary and Mr. William C. were living in South Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina. Got married, moved to Georgia. William C. died. Mary then married George Rogers. But before she married George Rogers, she did have a daughter, according to the probate record, Mary A. Rogers. So this says the slaves of George A. Rogers. When Mr. Rogers came to Pike, died in 62, these were the slaves recorded. So now this again is the story. Did the wife Mary bring any slaves with her into her marriage with George? Had to, because I'm descending from these Wannamakers out of Orangeburg, South Carolina. And actually, the Wannamakers were in Orangeburg. And that beautiful photo that you saw of Lucretia and her husband, they too were in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And so that loose leaf record helped for me to crack open my connection between Orangeburg, South Carolina, and Pike County to Bullitt County, Alabama. That Rogers names that you guys may have a connection to, sometimes they may have descended from the Wannamakers. So if you go into Ancestry or MyHeritage or your testing platform and you search for the name Wannamaker or search for Orangeburg, South Carolina, what matches do you get? Because now what this is guiding us to say is that this is what I need to be paying attention to, and the surnames I need to be paying attention to, because slaves were taken from Orangeburg to Georgia, then to Pike County, Alabama. Mr. Rogers had a lot of slaves. So let me see, so here is George Wannamaker. This is George's record. So let me look for Mr. Rogers. Okay, so there's Miss Mary Wannamaker Rogers. And so if I go, and so this is in my tree. So if I look at Mary, then this is going to take me back to, why is this taking me? The Rump name is another name you got to consider, Rumph. And I know there are Rumps in Bullock.
Yeah, I'm related to them.
And Golson is another name we have to consider, because we want to drill who did she bring slaves into that. And I know there are Golsons in Bullock, Pike, Macon, the surrounding areas. Crowell, there's another name of Crowell. So as we're paying attention to, again, the will and the distribution of the slaves, so look at this. Here's Miss Elizabeth Rump and all of her slaves. And then Lucy and her 4 children, Chloe and her, so all of this, so who is Elizabeth is a wife. So Elizabeth got all of these slaves because she was the newest wife. But then down here, Elizabeth Crowell, who's a daughter, she got these slaves. I see Louisa from here. Mary Ann Rogers, who was a child, she got these slaves. So this name, I have to vet, like I mentioned about how I would say, where were they born? Where did they die? So they completely stayed in South Carolina. So this basically means if I go look for Golsons in South Carolina, will I see matches? If I go look for Crowells in Georgia and South Carolina, will I see matches? Because Elizabeth got slaves and she died in Georgia. But did her children migrate to Pike or Barber? So this is where drilling into that family, looking at those surnames and paying attention to who they married and where they died and that kind of thing is what's going to help us to figure out our matches. So with the Rogers name, so let me go to the Rogers in Alabama. Okay, so here is Mary Rump. First, she married William C. These were the children she had under William C. Then they came to Georgia, and then she married George Anderson Rogers. These were the children here that came under the name Rogers. but George himself died in Pike County. It wasn't Bullitt County in 62, in Pike County. And he had 84 slaves in 1860. So if you're one trying to figure out where your Rogers names are coming from, this is where they're coming from. This guy here, he came out of Georgia. But then if those slaves connected with the Wannamaker slaves, and now you're pulling back DNA matches to South Carolina, this is where that name is going to come into play, and especially if you have connections to the name Wannamaker. Especially that. And this is just me identifying either a DNA match or someone that I need to follow up with. And I need to finish vetting his will, because I have it identified here, because I wanted to see what was recorded. Actually, that's that record we saw. But this man had 64 slaves. He had 84 slaves when he died. And we only saw a handful on that probate record. So sometimes the cover of the probate record does not list all of the slaves. He could have gifted his slaves before, and this could have just been the subset that he wanted to sell. So that's why it's important to read that probate record. Read it for clarity and really trying to understand what did they do and how did they handle those slaves. Then it's important to look at the deeds. So this is now going to be my segue into the resource that I shared with you guys. And so basically with the resources that I shared, that I mentioned to you that a few years ago, I literally transcribed all of Pike County, Alabama. And it's on this website here called theshanproject.com. The Slaves Had a Name Project. And I started this 5 years ago, pre-COVID. It had a different name. Emily was assisting me. That's why I love Emily South. Emily was assisting me, and we had another volunteer. His last name was Joseph Hill, and he passed pre-COVID. Was it pre-COVID? Or during COVID. But Joe and
It was pre-COVID. It was James Hill.
James, thank you. So we transcribed census records. Basically, we took all of the census records and we were transcribing them. And what I was doing, what I will show you, I'll show you that was in my Access database. So I developed this Access database. This was me. And what I was basically doing was looking at all of the probate records that I mentioned to you. And I created all these beautiful tabs to track them. So this was Mr. Robert Dennis Rogers, who was born in Marion, South Carolina, died in Pike County, Alabama. He died in 1847. So in his probate, he had 6 slaves. In 1840, he had 4 slaves. So this was me trying to track the slaves. This is the family tab. Who is his children? So this is Farmer Rogers. She married a Wilson. Are you related to Wilsons? Are you related to Bowens, Floyds, Tarts, Starlings? And what this is meaning, what I'm saying to you is this Rogers name. I haven't vetted Mr. Robert Dennis in my tree, but he was a Rogers that died in Pike. If you are related to Rogers, and you might have some Bowens, or maybe you have some Floyds, or maybe you have some Wilsons, what I'm basically saying is these people could have received slaves. But basically Sarah, his wife, Emily, you see that name right there? Sarah Berry. Sarah Berry, who married Mr. Robert Dennis Rogers.
I see it. Okay.
She received these slaves right here. This was me tracking the probates, the deeds, whatever records that I could find. So probate is death. So when he died in 1847, he had 6 slaves that I recorded. They went to his wife. So the wife is easy unless she marries again. But she was a Berry. So did she bring Berry slaves into the marriage prior to? This is the resource. This is every link, every probate record, whether it was on Ancestry or Family Search, that I found that information. The pages and all of that. And at some point in time for me, I knew that I needed to get this out of my head and I needed to be able to make it accessible. So what I'm looking at now, I'm looking through all of the Rogers to see whether there are any deeds recorded under their names. So this Mr. Thomas Rogers gave a gift of a slave named Emily in 1855, and the new owner took the last name Emerson. If you're related to Rogers, do you possibly have any matches to the name Emerson? Because this slave could have probably taken the name Emerson if she carried over to the 1870 census. Okay, let's see whether this person here, George W. Rogers, he might be a child of the Rogers that we were just looking at. But basically, the old owner was George, sold the slave Mary Ann, who was 19, to Jeremiah Ludlam. Might you be related to the name Ludlam? So that was all of the deeds that I recorded. But when it came to the probates, the reason why they should be here is because they should have been given some slaves. So this is Mr. George A. Rogers, which I believe is, there it is. See, I didn't even know Wannamaker was in my database. She's right there. Or maybe I just added her. But these are those few slaves that you saw. And so from it coming for taking it from an Access database, I knew I needed to put it somewhere. And so basically the data, the goal of this is the data gets moved to a website that is searchable, that allows you to be able to use it. There are tools, all of the videos I record, I do put under, where's my videos? They're in here somewhere. Using the website. So I will walk you through how to use the website. It is my prayer that you use this website. I don't want to do this in vain. This is all Pike County. This is all that data that you guys are looking for. So this is just telling you the same thing, build your tree, all of these other things. But there are key identifiers that I want you to know about. So let me go to a deed, a page for the deeds, and explain to you what you see. Every slave is given an identifier if I can link this slave to someone in the census. So the goal of this is going to be, if you tell me your ancestor in Bullitt County was living here at this row, well, I actually have the 1870 census here on the website for all of Pike, all of Macon, some of Barber. Montgomery is not here yet because I only want the lower section of Montgomery, and I just needed to figure out what was the lower section. But all of Pike, all of Bullock, all of Macon is definitely here. Some of Barber is here, and some other counties. I did transcribe the mortality schedule. So maybe your ancestor died right before 1870 or before 1880. And so now what I tried to do was give you a mortality schedule that you can look at and search by last name to be able to see if they died. But so every person is given an identifier. Okay, so that's Mr. Net. Okay, so every last name is given this unique identifier. So basically, I'm going to look for the name Rogers, which is a name we were talking about. So there's different ways you can filter this information out. You can filter it out by their name, depending on the page, their last name. So I'm going to look for everyone that had the name Rogers. So there is George W. as a person who sold. It is very possible that they could purchase. So I believe you'll want to look at those separately. Okay, there's Mr. Rogers. So according to this, there were 3 people with the name of Rogers who actually, there were deeds recorded. And remember I mentioned the name Emerson? she did, in fact, she received the gift of Emily, and then those Jeremiah received Mary Ann. So as I mentioned that in the database, it has now been added here to the website. So if you were possibly looking for your enslaved ancestor who may have gotten sold or purchased, this is a cell because this is the old name. And so now I want to get rid of the old name, and I want to see, were there any Rogers who purchased? So they would be the new owner. So you don't want to look at those together because you're maybe missing some information. So by looking at it separately, then you'll get the right information. So I don't see the name Rogers as purchasers here. So today at this moment, I haven't done Montgomery, which is where many of them did move to. Rogers is not here for deeds. The website is giving you different ways of viewing the information. You can look at the deed by the slave owner's ID or the deed by the slave's ID. What that means is the slave's information is first if we're looking by slave's ID. Because sometimes we might want to see the slave's information first before we see the enslaver. The SMID is the slave master's ID. And all that means is the slave master or the slave holder's name is going to be first to the left. And the slaves will be to the right. Because maybe you're strong in the enslaver's name, you want to see their data first, and then you want to see who are the slaves. And you can just scroll by using the different scroll indicators there on the top. Now, when it comes to the probate records, I did this because I kind of like looking at the slaves first, but the SLID or the slave's ID. And this allows you to be able to just see the probate record for the enslaver. So now what we're going to do, we're going to look for the slave master's last name, and we're going to look for everything that was Rogers. It could be ROD, but apparently there's only ROG. So this is who's recorded on by the last name of Rogers. 22 entries. So we knew about George, but I don't think I recall Philip. So there was a Philip Rogers who died in 1841. And he had Charlotte, Dublin, a Ben, a Wash, and a Lucius, and a Lydia. So if they happen to live to 1870, we're talking about 29 more years. Wash may have. Was he kept with? So Wash was a slave of Mr. Rogers. So as we scroll over to the right, we want to see, who did he get sold to? Ooh, look at that name, DeBose. Emily, aren't you tracking some DeBoses? Or somebody might.
I am.
Ooh. That's why it's so important to know these names, y'all. So this right here is showing us that in that Philip Rogers, he was sold to a DeBose. Emily is also tracking Barry. And so those names, sometimes they marry cousins, they become interchangeable. When you know the tree and you understand how their tree is structured, you can make sense of these relationships. Then Sarah. Sarah was another name that had slaves. She had a Scylla, a Ben, a Amy, a Jenny, and you can just scroll to the right. And the new owner is Sarah Rogers, and who sold her? Robert Dennis. So now we're seeing a Robert Dennis died, and Sarah received the slaves. Was Sarah a granddaughter? Who was Sarah to Mr. Dennis? So that's something that, had I built out the tree to understand that Dennis connection or looked at that probate record, that would have made sense, right? So this is showing you how you could use this website to filter out information. Everything is a learning curve, people. I know. I'm going to search for DeBose, just because Emily is tracking DeBose and that Mr. Samuel is interesting. So now that you have the slave owner ID, every individual slave owner gets an ID. The slaves get an ID based on the 1870 connection. My prayer is that we can link our census records to the data. So if you tell me I found my ancestor, this was them here, and I can find them linked to the data here, then I will give their ID here under SLID, the very first column over here. So there are some SLIDs identified up here. This is going to try to sort. I clicked on the wrong thing. I'm sorry. So there are some slaves identified, majority may be mine. But that's why I want you to tell me if you've identified your ancestors, because see, there are some slaves identified here. Some are Emily's, because Emily and I are connected. Most of them right now are under the name Stinson's, but basically this is us mapping Charles to the 1870 census, and he has an identifier. So he, in that database, he's currently the 13,613th person on that list. That list currently has 86,000 rows. So as I add new census records, their identifier is going to be based on what number they are in the record, in the database here. So you may be asking me, Delbert, this is all well and great. Where's the resources where you did all this work? So if you go to this last tab here, page here, this is giving you the enslaver and all of the website links that you saw in the database so that you can search for yourself. So if I just filtered out Rogers, anybody Rogers, you know, so you can sort it by last name over here. You can type it in there to filter it out. This is going to be anyone that had the name Rogers. So see how she's not a Rogers here. So that's why it's important to know those women's surnames and married names. But because I just typed Rogers, I catch her here in this list. And now here's all of those websites so that you can go to Family Search, go to Ancestry, print that record, those records out for yourself. So I have achieved all three things I wanted to achieve tonight. There are some resources here. Diseases defined, because that's kind of cool to understand what some of the diseases were. Indian tribe resources, I try to add here. Alabama resources, because I'm realizing I'm branching out of not just Alabama. Now I'm looking at Georgia, South Carolina. So I just want to be able to add pertinent information that's going to help you to understand researching enslaved ancestors. There are definitely other resources out here that's designed to just provide you resources. But when I first started this was really all about Bullock and Alabama and the corner around Bullock. But now that I'm branching into South Carolinas and North Carolinas, any records that get transcribed, I want to be able to add them here. The last resource I want to tell you guys about, here's my training videos, is under About Us. So About Us, us is me, y'all know that. But this is basically just sharing with you guys just my history. So I shared with you, I had to slow down and start looking for records because I wrote these books for my grandmother's maternal side, but I wanted to be able to track my mom's dad's side, which is the Lloyd, the Fitzpatrick, the Stratford, the Wood. And so basically, so this is basically some of my Bullock County travels in 1989. And you're going to see Emily's beautiful face right there. So this was me and Emily and Orletta. We were all related under the same surname, met in Alabama back in the day. So this was me really just trying to help people to understand. I do my work. I just have a passion. All of this is for my grandmother, for the love I have for her. I did do a documentary on some of my family lines, but this is just really helping people to understand the journey I took. But the other thing I want to share with you about is if you've identified your Alabama resource, I'm so sorry. If you identified your ancestor that was enslaved, I have yet to submit my first family, but I have submitted, where is it? Joining the Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. This basically is if you've identified your ancestor with records and they were enslaved and you've tracked them down to yourself, that you can submit to be a member or to submit to be a part of this project. And I have done that. I've submitted 4 of my lines, but they're the same line. So it was easy. You know, my Sook, a lot of people hear me talk about. So I've submitted Sook, her daughter Betty, her daughter Lucretia, and James, because they were all enslaved. And then all the way down to me. And each of the lines I'm talking about, I will be submitting because we're doing this work with passion. I want my ancestors to be acknowledged and honored. So I have submitted myself to this here. So my website, basically, my goal is to give you resources. About the 1870 census, what I will tell you is when you load this page, it's going to that little pulse is going to happen for a few seconds. You might get a pop-up that says, do you want to wait? There is a lot of data. So just bear with me as I built this. Once you load it once, the second time should be better because it's going to cache or keep some of that information in your computer to make it easier. But these are the census records. So here's all of Barber, and I could filter it out by state and county. So I have some Maryland in here because we do have connections in Maryland. I am working on Maryland. So you guys haven't heard from me lately because I've been working over here in the Maryland corner and Virginia so that I can bring you guys and open up that information to you over there. Okay. So yeah, it still was loading the data. So you may get pop-ups. So just bear with me for the 1870 census listing. This is the only one that's going to do that because there is a lot of data. So the last thing I do want to share with you, if you are not familiar, is DNA Painter. So many of you know about me and DNA Painter, and there are videos up on my YouTube channel where I show you how to do DNA Painter. But this is what I want to speak about. I'm going to show Emily because Emily is a beautiful example to this beautiful problem. So Emily, this is Emily's where she matches me on the chromosomes and the segments. So this is how she looks at me. So what you do is you're going to add in a project or wherever you want your DNA to come from out of GEDmatch. It doesn't have to be in a project, but a project is a beautiful place because we know we're related, right? When you choose your identifier and you get results, every one of those people are going to be related to you based on the chromosome you chose. The centimorgan, I'm so sorry. Based on the centimorgan value you chose. So Emily matches me on about 3 surnames, probably now 4, because she's hitting Wannamaker too. Every surname I got, Emily has. But what DNA Painter does, GEDmatch will do this also so that you don't have to do this painstaking process. GEDmatch will do it. But this is telling me how we're related and the matches that match me in this position. And as I analyze you, as I look at your tree, as we talk to each other, this is helping to guide my matches to you. But now it's also helping me to say, for instance, Noreen is a Hannah match. Emily is a Hannah match. She's not Wiggum, she's a Hannah match. So as I believe many of these people may be Hannah, then now I should be able to say, oh God, Kenyatta is a Wannamaker, a Rogers, and an Anderson. Okay. This is a Wannamaker line.
Yada is my Stinson match.
Kenyatta?
Yeah, that's the one that goes back to Blaylock's.
I could pull my eyeballs out. That is so cool to hear that Blaylock name but she's also pulling, as you can see, she's hitting me at Anderson, Wannamaker, Rogers. So again, this is that situation where Rogers probably married a Stinson. It is for a fact. That happened. Because I think I mentioned to you that happened. The Stinsons marry the Rogers go back to Wannamaker, and so that's where that cross hits. Interesting. But what lane is taking us to Blaylock's? So you're saying Stinsons are taken to Blaylock's, or is it really the Wannamaker Rogers? I think it's the Wannamaker Rogers, Emily, and I don't think it's Stinson. Because remember, I have a queen match in here.
Right, we'll have to talk about it because she's the one that I told you about before with the records. And then she copied all the Stinson files and didn't want to share anything. That's the one there. And also when I looked at the Rogers, it went back to I think she's the one who went back, it was the one who went back to my common ancestor, which was Candace Blackman, which is also on the Stinsons, my Stinson match out of Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah, but them Stinsons, I literally figured out those Stinsons married the Rogers line.
They probably did.
Oh no, they did. I literally followed it. So the Stinsons married the Rogers line, and so again, the conversation is gonna fall. Is she pulling Blaylock because? And I believe she's pulling Blaylock because.
Now here she is. I'll tell you who's the person in the tree. The Rogers in the tree. The Rogers in the tree is hold on a minute. It's Mary Lee Rogers out of Alabama. She married a Capleton, Capelton.
Hold on. Let me go to my tree.
And it's Candace Blackman that did. Candace is hooked into my Cassie Stinson and Saracen's line. We have to talk about that. I have to tell you about that line too.
So is it this Mary Louise Rogers DeBose or just Rogers? Marianne Rump is, I think she's white. So here's a Rogers. So I just have to,
that was no, let's see.
because this is the enslaver side. So I have to figure out where our side.
Yeah, let's work and look at it tomorrow.
Okay, that'll work. That'll work.
Look at it tomorrow.
That'll work.
Because when I put up Rogers, she came up. I thought, well, I have one common ancestor that matched that name. Okay.
Okay. Let me go to William. Let me go to my line that hits Wannamaker.
I have two.
William, his wife. So I know that
when you have a chance, I need to know that Wannamaker connected that's got a record for Mary B. Hardwell. You just showed it. I'm looking to see what that connection is, so I can research it later.
I showed it when, where?
Just a moment ago.
Was it here or was it?
It was on the previous screen, I believe. Yeah, court minutes. Mary B. Jones Harwell. I want to. Oh gosh, can you send me that link?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, this is what I was going to try to show Rodney Ehu. So this is Houston. So this has to be.
Mention my name.
I did, but this has to be what state? Houston court minutes. I have to figure out, is this Almond late of this county? Okay, where's this county? William C. Wannamaker, late of this county, deceased on his entering into a bond, securities, died agreeably. James Almond was sworn before the court. The Joseph C. Culpepper, what court? So we would probably just have to look continually at another paper to pull out the location of the court. But yes, I'll send. And there is Rebecca Jones, orphans of, is that a different ordained Mary Jones?
That's a. Well, I don't know. Mary Jones.
Remember, I told you that. Yes. So the conversation that that she's having with me is the fact that the Fitzpatrick daughter married a cook, and
that's where the Wannamaker came in.
No, the Wannamaker came in. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, she was the cook name who she married was a descendant of Wannamaker.
Okay.
That's
all right.
So the cook name became a descendant of Wannamaker.
I'll go back and look at that.
as a possibility. Okay, I will send that to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to
Oh
interrupt.
no,
That
baby,
was
no, that's
I
what this
just
is about.
that name just grabbed my attention so much. I've been into that record so much, you know.
No, absolutely. That's what this is about. It's about breaking through these.
Right.
I'm so glad you came. Oh my God, I'm so glad you came because I didn't even mention that the cooks extended into Fitzpatrick. So I go crazy with Annette because I'm like, Annette, you are all over my DNA painter, and I'm absolutely losing my mind. You're only supposed to be on Fitzpatrick, Annette. Why are you over here? But as I'm drilling into the records, it's now exposing itself of how
Right.
these brought slaves here, brought slaves here, those slaves got together.
Mm-hmm.
Then I mean the families, our families cross lines, their families cross lines.
Right.
And that's why when people want to tell you,
Well, they all traveled in packs.
absolutely.
All those immigrants who came in out of the Middle Eastern seaboard going south. They traveled in bunches. One family followed another.
Absolutely, because they had to have a support system. It's no more
Mhm.
different than our family migrated here to Rochester. Somebody came and they brought the others and they helped them to get a job. So absolutely, it makes sense. So we have to think like that as well, right?
Mhm.
Look at all these dad blasted chromosomes and segments that Annette is hitting me on here. And it's like,
Wow.
how? Yes, I use low, but I use low but I prove low. I don't just use it, I prove it. I prove it with my records. And when I look at Annette and I'm like, you're only supposed to be on one corner, Annette. And so she's hitting Charles Uzel. There was a conversation. Remember, I mentioned the name Leslie, guys.
Mhm.
Leslie is hooking up with Hootens and Wootens, and Charles Uzel is out of South Carolina. Oh my God. Who's on Cindy can help us to better understand the Charles Uzel corner. I think you and Cindy need to talk about Charles Uzel. She can maybe help you to understand what's hitting with the South Carolina corner because she's explaining some things to me as well.
Right.
She is.
I mean, it's mind-boggling, you know.
I think we mentioned Candace Wiltshire, I think Emily, but this is a grouping right here. This is South Carolina because Noel is out of South Carolina. He's actually out of Williamsburg. So as slaves were probably taken to Williamsburg from Edgefield and went to Georgia, these are the things that we have to understand. Then here's Bird. And so, we have to let the DNA direct our research. And from here, look at the records to prove it. Because until we prove it, no one's going to listen to us. And I'm going to prove it because I'm going to make them listen to me. You mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned Emily Block or Cheatwood Block, Julia, this person here, but if not, but this is how Annette is just lining up all over the place. Here's my Hannah. And I said, Annette, are you related to Hannah's? She said, I think she did a search. Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. That's my Wiggum line. Then Annette, I know, is on my Fitzpatrick line. But now Fitzpatrick is crossing Cook or Rogers, Hook, and now that's on my Wannamaker line.
And Rogers. I mean, I've got a Rogers.
Rogers is my Stratford line.
Mm-hmm.
The Stratfords were in Montgomery, and the Wannamakers were in Montgomery. So that, and I know Annette's people were in Montgomery. So that definitely, especially if they worked on the same property, the same land, depending on their ages. So this is really, I pray, I don't hope. When I wanted to stick on the wall and stay stuck, I pray that what I bring to you, especially in this, is helping you to think broadly about how you research. When I do this kind of stuff, I don't do nothing else. I can't have any distractions because I want to make sure I'm studying what I'm looking for and I'm documenting it so that it makes sense to me so that I can figure this out. But until you build those trees out further, you won't understand why you're matching so many different names. And this DNA painter, GenMatch, does this as well, guys. It will show you the segments alignment for the groupings. I just love how DNA Painter shows it to me. And it took me about 2 days because I have over 200 plus, maybe
Yeah.
300 people in my DNA Painter. Everybody that's in my project, I got in here because you're related to me. 43% of my DNA is mapped. This is without parents and grandparents. This is just hi cousins and you guys. And but this is helping me to figure out how I'm matching to you. But this was a conversation about Wannamakers, Rogers, Stratfords, and all of that stuff. So yay, I can put this video up on my YouTube and maybe someone can get a breakthrough in this space. So I've let play this morning a SAR video about, there it is, full text search. That's what it's called. So that now I don't have to show it. I'm just going to share this video. So basically what the full text search does, I'll use her video to show the visuals. What it will do for you is you type in a name, you type in a location, the type of records you want to see. And what it does, once you click on it to view the actual record, it will transcribe the information on that page so that you could read it in English.
You say this is SAR or is it Family Search?
So this is Family Search, but the SAR did a training video.
I see. Okay, I got it.
I'm going to share the training video, and I'm going to go back and watch it because while watching this video earlier, I was listening to it while I was doing things, but they actually mentioned you could filter in deeds. I was not going to pay this any attention if you can't show me deeds, but this is a record right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to enlarge it as best I can. So this is the Prince William County, Virginia. This is her searching for a person, a location, and she typed in a name, but you can also type slave.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have to figure out is how to get it to give me the name and the slave. If you put quotation marks around it, she will explain that, then it will filter out noise. And it will only give you the specific information you're looking for. But if you look to the right, oh goodness, what have I done? If you look to the right, it transcribes it and gives you the English of what it believes is on the page.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
So
Yeah,
if
you have to go back and check it to make sure it's correct.
right.
It's like any AI, right? But yeah.
Right. It may misinterpret a word, but at least the core. So when you're looking for the word slave, stop, go to the page and see if did they do a good job of translating that name into what we see in English. This is what you need, Rodney. You don't need nobody else. This is a good, strong place for you to start with researching an area, getting it to find a record, and they will give you the transcribed information on the right so you could fully read it. And I put the link in the chat so that you guys can watch that. I'm going to rewatch it myself because there's always things that we can learn, right? And I don't know everything. I only share with you guys what I know strongly of, but we're all trying our best to learn the most we can to speed up what we're trying to do. So it was so interesting. YouTube decided to share that video, and I was just letting it play. Let me see what she's talking about. But I think they did a really good job of trying to share with you the different ways that you could search, filter your search, and try to get a more concise records information for the areas you're looking for. So use that. And I'm going to pray that maybe I can do that instead of trying to transcribe every book and every deed in the counties I need. But there are some things that are not online, guys. And some of these records have yet to still be transcribed. So they're constantly working on it daily. And when you do a search on family search for Negro, servant, slave. Those are going to be 3 strong terms they use for the slaves so that you're not missing a record because you misinterpreted how they identified them in the record. So, but I think that video is going to help you to figure out how to use family search to go looking for the deeds and the location you're looking for written in those records, because that's our money. That's our game changer of how to find the additional slaves we haven't seen. So, all right. Miss Cindy, you finally came on. And Miss Patricia, I got it here. Did you guys learn anything helpful?
Well, I've even found a Wannamaker tonight.
You have a
From
Wannamaker?
from Orangeburg, South Carolina. She was born in 1819 and married John Smith. And I found this through Royce Altman Burnett. I share 14 Morgans with.
Uh-huh.
I've got to check out more because I can't listen and work at the same time. But yeah.
Oh, I love Sydney and Patricia. Patricia's her sister. So Patricia is the quiet one, but she's a support system. I love these guys. Oh my gosh. They are such willing workers and willing helpers. It's amazing you have Wannamaker because she hits my South Carolina corner. And
Yep.
I think that's gonna run into that Williams line out of South Carolina in Edgefield. So think
Yep.
about that when you're thinking about that as a possible connection, Miss Cindy.
Actually, that's my Allen in Edgefield, South Carolina.
Allen?
Yeah, and they moved to Macon County. My Williams line was Duplin, North Carolina, that went to Marengo
Wow.
County.
Oh, and we know we have that Marengo hidden. So
Right.
I'm gonna have you present one time, Cindy, and we're gonna talk and just think about what now that you've been a part of the Bullet group, now that you've heard our surnames, what can you share to help us to better understand? We're not gonna talk about Marengo, but I know Rodney want to know about Marengo. I'm in Marengo. My ancestors.
I'm in Marengo.
And there's something about what happened for them taking those slaves from the South and moving from that area and moving them over to Marengo, and then eventually they must have tried to make their way back and came over here to our area, right? Bullock and Macon and all of this other stuff. What was going on with Marengo? Marengo, I will tell you, was considered in the Bible Belt. That I know. So I don't know because my ancestor was a traveling preacher. He actually studied to be a preacher in Marengo. So there's something about that Bible Belt. It could be that they were pastors and bringing slaves with them when they came over to learn how to preach. I don't know. Something's going on with that Marengo. So think about, Cindy, I think you have some strong names that you know the names that we're speaking to. You know the names I've spoken to, and I'm related to everybody on this call 4 times through
Well, you know, Marengo County also has a history of early history of attempts at early wine growing. So a lot of slaves were imported, I'm sure, to farm those burgeoning wine orchards.
Okay.
They were not successful. I don't know why they were not successful, but the attempts at growing wine in Marengo failed.
We're trying, but Cindy, well, let's talk, Cindy. Cindy is helping to better understand the enslavers' patterns of because a lot of them were her family members, and she's is trying to help us to call out those connections.
Excellent. Thank you, Cindy.
Absolutely.
Oh, I tell you, it's very confusing though. The names just overlap. I found Arringtons now and Fitzpatrick's, and my notes are not all put together right. So don't ask me anything too soon.
No. But I want you to think about, even if it's just a name, what you found, and or message me some talking points, and then what I can do is ask the group if you want to understand Arrington's out of, hypothetically, South Carolina, Wannamaker. I definitely want to have a better understanding of what you know and what you have on the Wannamaker name, because that can help me to understand.
I just found it tonight when
I
you said
know.
to search our DNA matches, so I've got a lot of work on that. Maybe I'll sick Patty on that one.
I haven't neglected my Alabama corner because I love you guys. I've been researching Maryland. And if you did notice, there was a couple of names in my DNA painter that was Claggett. There's a few other people that are hitting Frederick, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Consider searching for matches in Frederick, Maryland.
Yeah.
Because you are going to be hitting Frederick, Maryland. And from Frederick, Maryland, we go over to other Charles
Mhm.
County, St. Anne Arundel. We're going to go further back into
Mhm.
Maryland and then Virginia or wherever we are.
Well,
But
don't go too far.
but I've been trying to make sure I
I'm
could.
trying to catch up.
I know. And thank you so much for coming.
Here.
Good night.
Night.
Be strong,
Good
be
night.
strong, be brave.